I'm trying to save him before it's too late. Those were the words my wife whispered in our kitchen at midnight, tears streaming down her face, her hands trembling over a laptop I'd never seen before. Words that made my blood run cold because I had no idea who him was, or what she meant by too late. Please, before we continue, do not forget to like, share and subscribe. My name is Lookman Peterson and I've been married to Juliet for 8 years. 8 years of what I thought was honest, open, beautiful marriage. We don't keep secrets. We don't lie to each other. That's what I believed anyway until 3 weeks ago when I started noticing something strange. Every night at exactly midnight, Juliet would slip out of our bed and disappear downstairs. At first I thought nothing of it. Maybe she was thirsty. Maybe she couldn't sleep. Maybe she was stress-eating ice cream and didn't want me to judge her. We all have our quirks, right? But it happened every single night. Without fail. Like clockwork. Midnight. Gone. Back 45 minutes later, smelling faintly of something I couldn't place. Paper? Her hands always seemed slightly red, like she'd been writing for hours. I started waking up on purpose just to check. Sure enough, her side of the bed would be cold. The sheets pulled back carefully like she was trying not to wake me. And downstairs I'd hear faint sounds, tapping, shuffling, sometimes a soft sob that made my chest tighten. Tonight was different though. Tonight I couldn't take it anymore. The not knowing was eating me alive. So I pretended to fall asleep early, told her I was exhausted from work, and lay there in the dark, fully clothed under the covers, waiting. At 11:47 p.m. she moved. I felt the mattress shift as she carefully slid out of bed. She tiptoed to the closet, pulled out something wrapped in a plastic bag and left the room without a sound. It was so practiced, so deliberate, like she'd done this 100 times before. I counted to 10, my heart hammering in my chest, then followed her. The hallway was dark except for the faint glow from the kitchen at the end. I could hear her now, not speaking but making soft, broken sounds, like she was practicing something. Rehearsing. My mind raced with possibilities, each one worse than the last. Was she talking to someone? Another man? Was she planning to leave me? I crept down the stairs, each step creaking under my weight. I froze every time, certain she'd hear me, but she didn't. She was too focused on whatever she was doing. When I reached the bottom, I pressed myself against the wall and peered around the corner into the kitchen. What I saw made my breath catch in my throat. Juliet sat at our kitchen table, bathed in the blue glow of a laptop. Her hands moved in strange, fluid patterns, fingers forming shapes, spelling out letters in the air, her face twisted in concentration. On the screen, a video played, ASL for Beginners, Lesson 47, Expressing Grief and Loss. Sign language. My wife was learning sign language. Relief flooded through me so fast I almost laughed. Not an affair. Not a secret addiction. Just sign language? But then I saw her face. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she practiced the same gesture over and over, hands pressed to her chest, then extending forward. I didn't know what it meant, but the anguish in her eyes told me everything. This wasn't just a hobby. This was something deeper. Something painful. On the table beside her laptop sat an old photograph, faded and creased. I squinted, trying to make it out. A young Juliet, maybe 16 or 17, standing next to a boy who looked just like her. Same eyes. Same smile. The boy's hands were frozen mid-gesture, forming a heart shape. Juliet's arm was wrapped around him, but her eyes looked haunted even then, like she was holding on to something she knew she'd lose. I'd never seen that photo before. I'd never seen that boy before. My foot caught the edge of the doorframe and the floor creaked. Juliet's head snapped up, eyes wide with terror. She slammed the laptop shut and scrambled to hide the photograph, but it was too late. I was already stepping into the light. Look, man. Her voice cracked. What are you? How long have you been standing there? Long enough, I said quietly, my eyes fixed on the closed laptop. What are you doing, Jules? She couldn't speak. Her hands trembled violently. She opened her mouth twice but no words came out. Finally she whispered, I'm trying to save him. Save who? Her eyes dropped to the photograph she'd been trying to hide. Trevor. I'm trying to save Trevor. Before it's too late. Like it was for... She stopped herself, biting her lips so hard I thought it might bleed. Like it was for who? I pressed, stepping closer. She closed her eyes. When she opened them again, they were filled with 20 years of buried pain. My brother. Daniel. My world tilted. You don't have a brother. I did. The words hung between us like a physical thing. I pulled out the chair across from her and sat down slowly, my mind reeling. 8 years of marriage. 8 years of late-night conversations, of sharing our deepest fears and dreams. And she'd never once mentioned a brother. "Tell me," I said. Juliet's hands were shaking so badly she had to clasp them together. She stared at the photograph like it might come alive and swallow her whole. "His name was Daniel. He was my little brother. He was 14 when he died. I was 17. Juliet. He was deaf," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Deaf from birth. Our parents were immigrants. They worked 2 jobs each, sometimes 3. They never had time to learn proper sign language. They'd just point, gesture, yell sometimes even though he couldn't hear them. It was chaos. Daniel was always so frustrated, so isolated. So I became his voice. I learned sign language from library books and old YouTube videos. I promised him I'd always understand him. That he'd never be alone." She picked up the photograph with trembling fingers. "This was taken 3 months before he died. We were at the lake, our lake. The place we'd go when things got too loud at home. He loved it there. Said it was the only place where being deaf didn't matter because you could just feel everything instead." I wanted to reach for her hand, but something in her posture told me to wait. She needed to get this out. One night in February I was supposed to stay home with him. My parents were working late. Daniel had begged me not to go out. He signed, "Please don't leave me tonight." But I was 17 and stupid and angry about everything. I was stressed about college applications, fighting with my parents, feeling suffocated. So I signed back. Her voice broke. "I signed back. Stop being a baby. I'll be back soon. Jules?" "I went to a party," she said, tears spilling faster now. "A stupid party with people I don't even remember." "And Daniel?" She pressed her fist to her mouth, shoulders shaking. "Daniel went to our lake. Alone. The ice looked thick that year. He walked out onto it. Maybe he was upset. Maybe he was looking for me. I don't know. I'll never know." My stomach dropped. I could already see where this was going. The ice cracked. He fell through. Juliet's whole body was shaking now, but she forced herself to continue. A jogger found him 20 minutes later. Daniel was still in the water, trying to stay afloat, hands desperately signing above the surface. The jogger called 911. Paramedics came. Police came. Bystanders gathered. And Daniel was signing frantically, "Help! Help! Sister! Help!" But no one understood. They thought he was just panicking, flailing his arms. They tried to calm him down, told him to stay still, but he kept signing faster and faster because he thought if he just made the gestures clear enough, someone would understand. I felt sick. "Jules?" By the time they pulled him out, hypothermia had set in. He was unconscious. He died in the ambulance before they even reached the hospital. She looked up at me, her eyes hollow. I got there at 12:47 a.m. The doctors were still trying to revive him, but I knew. I could feel it. My parents were screaming. My mom collapsed. And then one of the paramedics came over to me and said. She swallowed hard. He said, "Your brother was trying to say something with his hands the whole time. We thought he was just scared. We didn't know he couldn't talk." I couldn't breathe. The weight of what she was telling me pressed down on my chest like a boulder. Daniel had been signing for help. For me. And no one understood. He died alone in the water, calling for me, and I wasn't there. I was at a party, ignoring his calls, laughing with people whose names I can't even remember. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. I checked my phone after. He called me 4 times that night. 4 times. And I ignored every single one. "Juliet, you were 17? I promised him," she shouted, her voice breaking. "I promised I'd always understand him. That he'd never be alone. And when he needed me most, when he was drowning and signing for me, I was too busy being selfish to even answer my phone." The kitchen fell silent except for her ragged breathing. I reached across the table and took her hands in mine. They were ice cold. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I asked gently. She pulled her hands away, wrapping her arms around herself. "Because I couldn't. Every time I tried, I saw his face. I saw his hands reaching up through the ice. I saw the way my parents looked at me at the funeral, like I'd killed him myself." "Your parents blamed you?" I asked, my voice tight. "They never said it out loud," Juliet whispered. "But I could see it in their eyes. At the funeral, my mom wouldn't even look at me. My dad gave the eulogy and talked about how Daniel was always waiting for me to come home from school, how I was his favorite person in the world. Everyone kept saying what a good sister I was, and I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them the truth, that I'd abandoned him. That his last 4 phone calls went to voicemail because I was too annoyed to pick up." She stood abruptly, pacing to the window, arms still wrapped tight around herself. After Daniel died, I couldn't stay in that house. I couldn't look at my parents. I couldn't walk past his empty room. So I buried it. I deleted every photo of him from my phone. I stopped visiting my parents. When I met you 5 years later, I told myself I was starting fresh. Clean slate. No past. Just forward. I stood and walked to her, placing my hands gently on her shoulders. But it wasn't gone. It was just waiting. She nodded, her reflection in the window glass showing the tears still streaming down her face. 6 months ago, we went to David's wife's funeral. Do you remember? I did. Our neighbor David had lost his wife, Rebecca, in a car accident. It was sudden, tragic. Juliet had insisted we go to the reception even though we barely knew them. At the reception, she continued, I saw David's son, Trevor. He's 8 years old and deaf. He was sitting alone in the corner, crying, hands moving in these desperate gestures. No one was paying attention to him. David was too overwhelmed with his own grief to notice. And I watched this little boy signing Mama over and over, and no one, not a single person, understood him. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. It was Daniel all over again. A deaf child, crying in silence, surrounded by people who couldn't hear him. And I thought, I can't let it happen again. I can't let another little boy drown in silence because no one bothered to learn his language. Understanding crashed over me like a wave. That's why you started learning sign language. She nodded. That night I came home and looked up ASL courses. I bought books, subscribed to websites, watched hundreds of hours of videos. Every midnight after you fell asleep, I'd come down here and practice. I needed to get good enough to actually help Trevor. Good enough that he wouldn't feel alone. But why hide it from me? I asked, turning her to face me. I would have supported you. I would have learned with you. Juliet's face crumbled. Because I was ashamed. I thought if I told you about Daniel, you'd see me differently. You'd see the girl who let her brother die. The girl who chose a stupid party over family. You'd realize you married someone fundamentally broken. She took a shuddering breath. And I couldn't bear the thought of you looking at me the way my parents did. Like I was a murderer. You're not a murderer, I said firmly. You were a kid who made a mistake. A terrible, tragic mistake, but a mistake. You didn't kill Daniel. An accident killed Daniel. I wasn't there, she said, her voice hollow. That's the same thing. I pulled her into my arms and she finally let herself collapse against me, sobbing into my chest. I held her tight, feeling 8 years of hidden pain pour out of her. All those nights I'd wondered where she was, what she was doing. She'd been here, alone, trying to save a little boy to make up for the brother she couldn't save. I thought you were having an affair, I admitted quietly. She pulled back, looking up at me with red, swollen eyes. What? I checked our bank statements, I confessed. I saw the charges to sign language websites. I saw you sneaking out every night. I followed you tonight because I thought. I couldn't finish the sentence. She touched my face gently. I'm so sorry. I should have just told you. I should have trusted you. We both should have trusted each other more. I wiped tears from her cheeks. But I understand now. And Jules? What you're doing for Trevor, it's not just redemption. It's beautiful. You think so? I know so. Can I meet him? Can you show me? She hesitated, then nodded. Tomorrow. I'll take you to meet him. But look, man, you need to know. David doesn't really know sign language either. He's trying, but he works night shifts at the hospital as a custodian. He's exhausted all the time. He's drowning in medical bills from Rebecca's accident. He's doing his best, but Trevor is slipping away. I can see it. 3 months ago, Trevor stopped signing altogether. Just stopped. He'd sit in his room staring at photos of his mom for hours. The school called it selective mutism, but I know what it really is. What? It's the same silence I saw in Daniel before he walked onto that ice. It's giving up. The next evening, Juliet took me to the fence between our yard and David's. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across both properties. Sitting on David's back porch was a small boy with dark hair and large, sad eyes. Trevor. He sat completely still, staring up at the darkening sky, his hands resting limply in his lap. Watch, Juliet whispered. Then she raised her hands and signed across the fence. I didn't understand the gestures, but Trevor's reaction was immediate. His head snapped toward us and his entire face transformed. The sadness melted away, replaced by pure joy. He jumped up and started signing back rapidly, his hands flying through the air with desperate enthusiasm. What's he saying? I asked. He said, you came back. You're learning so fast. Juliet signed something else and Trevor's eyes shifted to me. She turned to me. I told him you're my husband and that you want to learn too. Trevor waved shyly at me and I waved back, feeling my throat tighten. This small gesture, this simple acknowledgement, made him smile wider than I'd ever seen a kid smile. Can you teach me? I asked Juliet. Can you teach me to say hello to him? She took my hands and positioned them, showing me the sign for hello, and then, my name is Lookman. I repeated it clumsily and Trevor giggled, actually giggled, at my terrible form. But then he signed back encouragingly, correcting me gently. He says you're doing great for a beginner, Juliet translated, smiling through fresh tears. The back door opened and David stepped out. He was tall, thin, with the kind of exhaustion that goes bone deep. Dark circles under his eyes, shoulders perpetually slumped. He saw us and nodded gratefully, signing something simple to Trevor. Trevor immediately corrected him with visible frustration. David's face fell. He tried again but Trevor shook his head and turned away. David's expression broke my heart. He looked at his son like he was staring across an ocean he'd never be able to cross. Then he noticed us watching and gave an apologetic smile before heading back inside. That happens every day, Juliet said quietly. David tries. He really does. But he's so tired and learning a whole new language when you're exhausted and grieving is nearly impossible. Trevor gets frustrated. David feels like a failure. And the gap between them just keeps growing. How often do you come here? Every night. After you fall asleep. Sometimes in the afternoons when David's at work and Trevor gets home from school. I've become. She paused, searching for the word. I've become his bridge. The only person he can really talk to. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Trevor's face when Juliet signed to him, the way he lit up like someone had finally turned on a light in a dark room. I thought about David's exhaustion, his visible desperation to connect with his own son. And I thought about Daniel drowning in that frozen lake, signing for help that never came. At breakfast the next morning I made a decision. Teach me, I told Juliet as she poured coffee. Teach me sign language. Not just a few phrases, really teach me. I want to learn with you. She looked up, surprised. Really? Really? Trevor needs more than one person who can understand him. David needs help. And honestly, I took her hand. I need to understand this part of you. The part you've been hiding. I want to know everything, Jules. No more secrets. Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were different. Grateful. Relieved. Okay, she whispered. Okay. That night at midnight, instead of pretending to sleep, I came downstairs with her. We sat at the kitchen table together, the laptop open between us, and she started from the beginning. The alphabet. Basic phrases. The grammar that's so different from English it feels like learning to think in an entirely new way. It's not just hand movements, she explained, her teacher voice emerging. It's facial expressions, body language, the speed and intensity of your signs. You're not just spelling words, you're expressing emotions, painting pictures in the air. I practiced clumsily, repeatedly making signs that meant completely different things than I intended. But Juliet was patient, correcting me gently, encouraging me when I got frustrated. And slowly, over the next 2 weeks, something shifted between us. The kitchen table stopped being a place of secrets and became sacred ground. Every midnight, we'd sit together, practicing, talking about Daniel, about Trevor, about all the things we'd been too afraid to say to each other. I learned about Daniel's favorite foods, his obsession with astronomy, the way he'd make Juliet laugh by signing jokes in the dark. She learned about my father's gambling addiction, the years in shelters, the reason I'd been so suspicious when she started sneaking around. I'm sorry I didn't trust you, I said one night, signing the words as I spoke them, my own clumsy way of apologizing in both languages. She signed back, I'm sorry I didn't trust you enough to tell you. 3 weeks later, Juliet and I went to visit Trevor and David together. David answered the door looking even more exhausted than before. Hey neighbors, he said with a tired smile. Come on in. Trevor was in the living room, coloring silently at the coffee table. When he saw Juliet he jumped up, grinning. Then he noticed me and tilted his head curiously. I signed slowly and carefully, Hello Trevor. My name is Lookman. I am learning your language. His eyes went wide. He looked at Juliet, then back at me, then signed rapidly to Juliet. She laughed. He says, you brought your husband. Is he learning too? That's so cool. I signed back, yes. I want to understand you. Trevor's face split into the biggest smile I'd ever seen. Then he did something that made my heart stop. He ran to me and hugged me tight. Just wrapped his arms around my waist and held on like I'd given him the greatest gift in the world. Over his head, I saw David lean against the doorframe, wiping his eyes. After Trevor let go, Juliet started teaching David some basic signs, reviewing what she'd been working on with him. David tried hard, but his hands were clumsy, his memory scattered from exhaustion. Trevor kept correcting him, getting increasingly frustrated, until finally he threw his hands up and walked away. "I'm sorry," David said to us, looking defeated. "I'm trying. I really am. But I work 10-hour night shifts and by the time I get home my brain's just mush. I can't retain anything. And Trevor can see how hard this is for me, and I think it makes him feel like a burden." "You're not giving up, are you?" I asked. "Never," David said firmly. "Rebecca made me promise right before she died. She signed to me, I barely understood but I got the message. She said, don't let him be alone. Find someone who speaks his language." When Juliet started coming around teaching Trevor, I knew Rebecca had somehow answered her own prayer. He looked at both of us. "You two are a miracle. You know that." Juliet's voice was thick with emotion. "We're just doing what someone should have done for my brother." "Your brother?" She told him about Daniel. The whole story. And David listened, tears streaming down his face, nodding because he understood that kind of loss, that kind of regret. When she finished, David signed something to Trevor, who'd come back into the room. Trevor looked at Juliet for a long moment, then signed something that made her gasp. "What did he say?" I asked. Juliet's voice shook. "He said, my mom used to tell me that angels don't speak, they sign. She said that's how God made sure deaf people would always be heard in heaven. Maybe that's why you came. Maybe my mom sent you." The room fell completely silent. David was crying openly now, not even trying to hide it. Juliet covered her mouth with her hand, shoulders shaking. And Trevor just stood there, looking at her with the kind of wisdom no 8-year-old should have. The wisdom that comes from losing everything and finding a small piece of it again. I signed to Trevor, my hands clumsy but earnest. "Your mother sounds like she was very wise. And very loved." He signed back. "She was. Are you going to keep learning?" "Yes. I promise." "Good," he signed, then added with a small smile, "You need a lot more practice." Everyone laughed, the tension breaking, and Trevor ran back to his coloring. But as we left that evening, walking back across the yards to our house, I felt something fundamental shift in my chest. This wasn't just about helping a neighbor kid anymore. This was about building something bigger. A community where people didn't have to drown in silence. "I have an idea," I told Juliet as we reached our front door. "What if we taught more people? What if we started a class? Free sign language lessons for the neighborhood. For anyone who wants to learn. We could meet every Saturday, use our living room." Juliet stopped walking. "You do that." "We do that," I corrected. "This isn't just your mission anymore, Jules. It's ours." She threw her arms around me right there in the driveway, holding me so tight I could barely breathe. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for not running. Thank you for understanding. Thank you for being you. Thank you for letting me in," I whispered back. "Even if it took you 8 years." She laughed through her tears. "Better late than never, right?" "Right." That Saturday we put up flyers around the neighborhood. Free ASL classes, Saturdays at 10 a.m., all welcome. We didn't expect much. Maybe a few curious neighbors. Maybe no one at all. 15 people showed up. David and Trevor came, of course. But so did the elderly woman from 3 houses down whose grandson was deaf. The young couple who just moved in and wanted to learn for their jobs as teachers. The teenage girl who said she'd always thought sign language was beautiful. The single father whose daughter's best friend at school was deaf. Every Saturday, our living room filled with people moving their hands through the air, practicing conversations that made no sound but held all the meaning in the world. Juliet was a natural teacher, patient, encouraging, never making anyone feel stupid for mistakes. And I became her assistant, helping with pronunciation, practicing dialogues, making people laugh when I signed something accidentally obscene. But the real magic happened when Trevor taught. Juliet would invite him to demonstrate certain signs, and he'd stand at the front of the room, this small 8-year-old boy, teaching adults how to speak his language. And you could see it, the confidence returning to his shoulders, the light coming back into his eyes. He wasn't a burden. He was a teacher. He mattered. David learned faster in those group sessions than he ever had alone. Something about the community, the shared struggle, the laughter when everyone made mistakes together, it took the pressure off. He and Trevor started actually communicating at home. Not perfectly. Not fluently. But enough. Enough for Trevor to tell his dad about his day. Enough for David to say, "I love you," and I'm proud of you, in the language Trevor actually spoke. 6 months passed. Then one evening a letter arrived in our mailbox. Official stationery from the Regional Deaf Community Center. Juliet opened it at the kitchen table, our table where everything had changed, and read aloud, "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Peterson, we've been hearing remarkable things about your community sign language classes. We've had several attendees reach out to us, expressing gratitude for the bridge you've built between hearing and deaf communities. We would like to offer you both full scholarships to become certified ASL interpreters. We need people like you, people who understand that silence isn't emptiness. It's a language waiting to be heard. Please contact us at your earliest convenience." She looked up at me, eyes shining. "Look, man, this is real. We could actually do this professionally. Is that what you want?" She looked at the photograph on the wall, the one she'd finally framed and hung in our kitchen. Daniel, smiling, hands frozen in that eternal heart shape. "Daniel wanted to be a teacher," she said softly. "He used to sign to me about how he'd teach other deaf kids, show them they weren't broken, just different. He never got the chance." She touched the frame gently. "But maybe I can do it for him. Maybe this is how I keep my promise, not just to Trevor but to Daniel. I can make sure no child drowns in silence ever again." We accepted the scholarships. Both of us. Over the next year we studied, practiced, took exams, and became certified. We didn't stop the Saturday classes. If anything, they grew. 20 people. 30. Eventually we had to move them to the community center because our living room couldn't hold everyone. Trevor thrived. He made friends in the neighborhood who could sign with him. He started smiling more, laughing more, being a kid again instead of a ghost haunted by loss. David got a better job, daytime hours, because once he could communicate with Trevor, he didn't feel like he was abandoning his son to loneliness anymore. And Juliet? She transformed. The guilt that had lived in her shoulders for 20 years began to lift. Not disappear, it would never fully disappear, but lift enough that she could breathe, could smile without that shadow behind her eyes, could talk about Daniel not as a wound but as a memory worth honoring. One Saturday evening after class, Trevor signed something to Juliet that made her cry. I asked her to translate. He said, "Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for learning my language. My mom would have really liked you." Juliet wiped her eyes. Then he said, "Do you think your brother would be proud of you? What did you tell him?" I signed back, "I hope so. I'm trying to be the sister he deserved." Now, every midnight Juliet and I still sit at that kitchen table. But we're not hiding anymore. We practice together, preparing for the interpreting jobs we take at schools, hospitals, courts, anywhere deaf people need a voice. The table that was once a place of secrets has become our sanctuary, our sacred space, the place where trauma transformed into purpose. On the wall beside Daniel's photo, we've added another frame. It's a certificate from the community center, thanking us for our service. But underneath the certificate, Juliet has written something in both English and ASL hand shapes she drew herself. For Daniel, whose voice will never be forgotten. For Trevor, who taught us that silence is not emptiness. For everyone who speaks without sound, we hear you. We will always hear you. And sometimes, late at night when the house is quiet, I catch Juliet signing to that photograph, signing stories about her day, about Trevor's progress, about the lives we're changing. Signing to the brother she couldn't save, proving with every gesture that his death wasn't meaningless. That his silence made her listen harder. That his loss taught her the most important lesson of all. Love isn't just about being heard. Sometimes it's about learning to hear. Trevor came over last weekend with a drawing he'd made. It showed 4 people sitting at a table, hands raised mid-sign, smiles on their faces. He'd labeled it, "My Second Family." David told us later that it was the first time Trevor had drawn anything since his mother died. That night, as Juliet and I sat at our kitchen table, practicing new signs and talking about the week ahead, I realized something. My wife had been going to the kitchen every midnight for months, carrying a grief I never knew about, trying to save a boy I'd never met, all to honor a brother I'd never heard of. And what I saw when I finally followed her didn't shock me because it was terrible. It shocked me because it was beautiful.